Hi there, my name is Kevin and welcome to this video where we're going to be looking at intersection observers. You guys have been asking for some JavaScript and we're finally doing some after a long time of not having done any, so that is pretty exciting. Just if you don't know what intersection observers are, they're an API that we can link into that lets us observe when things intersect with the page. Or with the viewport, I should be saying. So this is actually going to be the start of a series where we're going to be looking at intersection observer, and we're going to be seeing the cool and fun stuff you can do with it. You can see some of those things on the screen now, where the navigation that changes once you scroll down to a certain point, images that slide in. There's of course lazy loading of images, and something else that isn't in this example here that we're going to be looking at as well. It's going to be a really fun series over the next few weeks. But in those videos, I don't want to be focusing on how intersection observer is working and exactly how to set it up. I want to just put those things into action. So this video is the theory. This is the one where we learn how intersection observer works, how we can control it, all the different options we have with it. And then after that, in those videos, we're just going to take advantage of that to do the really cool stuff. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the video, I just want to say thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. You probably already know about Skillshare because I've talked about them a few times already, but just in case you don't, they're a massive online learning community with over 25,000 classes, and it's in things like UI, UX, web development, business, and tons of other stuff. I stumbled across a video this week called Creative Coding, which is looking at doing simple animation, SVG animations using CSS, and I don't know about you, but I think that's really cool and awesome. But my favorite thing about it was at the very end of the course, the instructor, she gives you access to like 5 or 6 SVGs that you can practice on beyond what following along in the videos that she had before that. So that's really nice because you don't have to scour the internet to try and practice. You don't want to go and hunt down SVGs and vectors. So she gives you a bunch that will work really well and you can do some fun and cool stuff with. So that was, it's a nice way to help reinforce the learning once you're done with it. So not only are there really awesome courses out there on Skillshare that are in what we are doing and what you're here to learn with coding and front-end development and all of that, but it's also super affordable. If you have an annual membership, it's less than $10 a month, which is just really cool and awesome, which is just crazy because their library of courses is so big. So it's really cool. But not only that, if you use the link that's in the description below, and it's the first thing that's right down there, you get your first 2 months for free. It gives you a lot of time to explore their library and you have full access to the library. There's no limitations on that trial whatsoever. So use that link down there, get 2 months for free, join over 7 million other people that are already on Skillshare, which is also really crazy. And yeah, go and check them out. So thank you for Skillshare once again for sponsoring this video. Now let's go and check out what you're here for, which is intersection observers. All right, so here we are in VS Code now. I'm also put the DevTools over on the side here. So we have VS Code, my browser, and the DevTools, just because this is going to come really in handy to be able to understand exactly what's going on. In the page itself, I just have these different sections set up, and you can see this sort of weird box thing I'm doing. And this is our simulated viewport. So it's not our real viewport; it's a simulated one. We're going to be pretending this is our viewport as we're working, just so we can understand exactly how the intersection observer is working while we're doing stuff in here. So I'm in my JavaScript file here. Everything is already linked up and everything. So the first thing we're going to do is just make an observation observer for the first section I have here. So each one of these is a different section. We're going to do it first for only the first one, and then we're going to look at how we can modify that to work for all of our different ones in here. So let's do a const of section 1 is equal to document.query selector. And my selector, the class on there I have is just section 1, like that. So we're looking at our section 1, and now we want to create our observer. So I'm going to create another one here. So I'm going to do const observer. So the observer here, it doesn't have to be observer. Every demo you look at will be observer. We're going to see when I dive more into it that we can come up with several different ones. You can name it what you want. But what's important is we create this as a new intersection observer. So I have my new intersection observer, and what we're going to be doing in here and how the intersection observer works is it comes in with we need a callback function. So we put a callback here and options. So here, I'll just put that on a new line so we can see the whole thing all together. So we have our new intersection observer. Again, it has the callback and the options that we are going to feed it. So and actually, let's make this just a bit bigger so we can have that all on one line for now. So obviously we don't want to just write callback and options like that, but options will actually stay just as options. We're going to sort of explore the options in a minute. So I'm going to leave that there for now. It's not going to be able to compile properly, but I'm going to leave it there for the moment. What we usually do here with the callback is we're going to be writing a function. So you can either do this as an arrow function or as a traditional function. Most of them you'll see it come in as a function like this. And what you're going to be doing with the function itself is the function itself is going to call two things. The function is going to call the entries, and we're going to explore what that is. And we're going to call back on the observer itself. So it's here we're referencing back to itself right there. And then what we'd want to do there is come in and we can create the function or whatever it is that we're going to be doing. So what I'm going to do, just so we can actually compile this, is I'm going to create a const options is equal to, and I'm just going to leave it blank for the moment, just so we don't get an error along the way. And what we want to do with these entries here is entries. I'm going to do a for each loop for each entry. We want to do something. So here I'm going to use an arrow function. So for every entry, we're going to do something, and I'm just going to do a console log entry. So we can actually see what is happening. And that's one of the reasons I have my console open here. So now we need to, so this exists, but it's not doing anything yet. We've created it. Now we need to actually use it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write observer. So that's the name that we just created there. So observer, and we're going to do dot observe, because we want to tell it to observe something. So intersection observers can observe. So what do we want it to observe? Well, the only thing we have that it can right now is section 1. So let's go and check that out. So I'll hit save on that. Let's shrink this back down now. So you can see as soon as that is refreshed, we actually got this showing up inside of our console. So we're getting our entry has just shown up. So let's go and take a look at it. So it's observed our section 1, and it tells us a whole bunch about it. We have our bounding client rectangle, so we can see the width and all the other information, the bottom, the top, the left, the right, all the information about it right there. We have the intersection ratio, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Is it intersecting? Yes or no? So is it on the page or is it not inside the viewport? The root bounds, the target itself. So here we have our entry, but what is the entry? Well, it's this section 1 right there. And then when it happened, the time on that as well. So we can get a lot of information about our target right there, which is really, really cool. So just a lot of the time we don't need to get all of this information. So one thing just to show you what we can do is entry.target instead. So let's hit save. And you can see now it's only loading in the section 1. So I can get just the target if I need just to get the target. So one thing that's really interesting with this is when I scroll and it goes off the page, whoop, that fires again. And now if we look in here, let's look down for a second, is intersecting has changed to false. And before the is intersecting was true. So that's cool, right? So it's every time it intersects or doesn't intersect with the page, it fires again. So now my is intersecting is once again true. So every time we go on or off the page, that gets fired. So this is a lot better than having an event listener that's listening for scroll and is checking. Oh, now, like finally this situation, but guess what? It has to keep checking. But it's only going to get fired when our element is actually observed intersecting or leaving the page. So that's really, really, really handy. So there's 3 options we can set. We can set the root, and by default, or if you set this to null. So if you do null, it's the same thing as not actually setting an option on it. So that's fine. You don't have to do it. And I think 99% of the time, you'll probably want to just leave it because the default. So if we have our root on there as null, or if you don't include it at all, that means it is the viewport. So if we leave it like that, it's just going to be the viewport. And we don't really have to worry about it, and we're going to be fine. There's also something called the threshold, which is a 0 to 1 scale. So it's between 0 and 1. We'll get to that in a second. And the last option that we can set for it is the rootMargin, which is margin like that. This works a lot like a margin would on something if you're setting margins in your CSS, and we'll explore that a little bit because it's going to sort of come into how this this fake viewport I created is going to work. Now the threshold by default is 0, so I'm just going to put it to 0 for the moment. And again, the root by default is null, so it will default to the viewport. And I'm going to set my root margin here to negative, whoops, it has to be in quotation marks, negative 150 pixels. So think of it like a margin on my viewport. So my viewport is like that. So if I do negative 150 pixels, it's going to pull my root margin in by 150 pixels. So why is that interesting? Let's go take a look. So it's observing that it's there, but remember before it had to leave the page? Now watch where it's actually firing when it's getting to this line, and this space here is 150 pixels. So here, every time it crosses this dotted line, you can see it's firing off there. And so that's really, really handy, right? So now you can actually control, you don't have to have something when it enters the viewport. You can have it enter at, when it's halfway through the page or whatever distance you literally want to set on there. And this is just like margin when you're dealing with CSS, in that you can write it in as like a 0, I don't know, negative 200 pixels, 0 or something like that, except it either has to be in pixels or in percentages. So if you left it as a 0, it's not going to work properly. It needs to have the pixel value on there. So just so you're aware of that, because I ran into a problem with it once. Though I think the error that it gives you is pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to leave this at negative 150. So I'm pulling down on this, and it would work on the left and the right too if you're doing side scrolling or there's something else going on with that. Where the threshold comes in is how much of this is actually on the page. So if I actually put the threshold to 1 right now, it's not actually going to work, which sounds interesting, but you're going to see it's not firing. See how it's never going off? And it's because, especially with my negative 150 here, I never have the entire thing inside of this space. So if the threshold is at 1, 100% of the item has to be on the page. Whereas if it's at 0, it's as soon as any little piece of it enters. Whereas let's change this to like a 0.25 and try that one out. So now it should fire there because only 0.25, 25% of it is visible. And then when I come back up that way, it's only going to fire. So we're inside of we've hit my margin, but it's not firing it because it hasn't hit this threshold yet. And then it should fire any second now. There we go. So now more than 25% of that section 1 is visible inside my viewport here. So now it's firing. Say you're doing one of those things where images sort of slide in as you're going. You probably want the image to be a little bit past the page. So you could use the root margin, but you also want to make sure that it's the whole image is already on there. So you might put the threshold up to 1 for something like that. But for this demo, we're just going to leave that at 0 for the time being. And I'm going to leave my root margin just as it is there. So let's look at how right now what we have is only working for section 1. But what if we wanted to detect if each one of my sections was getting loaded in there? So what we can do is sections here. So document.query selector all. So I can get all my section. So I'm not putting the dot here because I want to select all my section elements. And that should be good to go. Now what I can't do, so let's change this over to my sections now, but you're going to see it's not going to work. We're going to get an error. So the reason this isn't working is because the sections here is a node list and it can't have one observer on the whole list. So what we can do instead of this is we want to come here and we want to do a sections for each loop on that. So on the entire, we're going to look at for each section. So we have sections for each. So for each section inside of sections, we want to do something. So what do we want to do? Well, we want now our observer to observe that individual section. So for each one of my sections, so each section inside of sections, observe that section. So now if we hit save and we go and check it out, you can see I have all of them are getting pulled up. And anytime something comes on or off the screen, it's going to fire and fire and fire and fire. And if we look, there's the section 3, section 2, section 4. So I can keep track that each one of them is coming or leaving the page. So that's really, really handy and really, really cool, right? I think that's pretty awesome. So one thing I have done, if we go and look at my CSS, is I've created an inverse class. So here I'm just setting the background color to like a dark color and the color to white. So it's gonna be the same for all of them. But what we can do with this, and this is just like a really proof of concept type of thing, is instead of doing our console log here. So remember when we console log, we can see we're getting all these different pieces that are part of that. And the thing that's really important here is the target. So let's just change that back to target now and go and check that out. So now when we scroll, we should just be seeing there's section 2 is in the screen. Now section 1 left the screen. Now section 3 just entered the screen. Section 2 just left the screen. So every time something is going on there, you can see it's firing back and forth, depending if something's entering or leaving the screen. But console logging is all fine and dandy, but we don't really want to be console logging everything like that. We want to be doing something with it. So what we can do instead of that is we can say my entry target, which is what we were just seeing. That's all my sections that are right there as they come and they go. On the class list, we can toggle a class. So I'm going to toggle the class. I'm going to toggle the class of inverse in this case that I created. So let's save that and let's watch what happens when that starts going off. So right away you can see this one is actually switched over. Now as I scroll down, boop, you see that one just switched. And then when that one left the screen, let's go back up. You can see there, it went. And then when it leaves the screen, it's switching back. And then when you're going to see the next one, there's the next one bottom. Remember, it's not technically in my viewport because I set my root margin over here. So once it hits that space, it's toggling that class off. And then this one, as it leaves now, boop, that class gets reapplied to it because it's toggling it back on and off. So as I go through, those classes are sort of switching around back and forth as we go. Now, the weird thing with that is your intersection observer will fire right away when the page loads. So let's turn this back on here. So I'm going to hit refresh. We're going to see the page when it loads, all 5 of them are showing up. So it's all 5 of them are showing up. Now what it's doing is it's only showing me the target right now. But if we were to look at the entry, some of them would be. We're seeing all those. Now actually, I'm going to take off the target here just for a second so we can see what I'm going to be looking at. Is on all of them, we have this is intersecting. So is intersecting, false, false, false. The one that's true is this first one, which is currently on the screen. So that's why right now this one is dark. But if I come and I look down at that next one, it was dark too. And if I come look at the next one, it's dark too. And it will get, you can see that it's switched over. It's the wrong color just because that overlay is on it right now. This one is dark and it's switching over when I hover on top of it. So often you don't want your intersection observer to fire for everything when the things aren't currently on your page. You usually do want it to fire. Let's say you're lazy loading images and you had an image here. You'd want that to fire and come in right away because it's on your screen. But all those other ones, you don't want images that are here to be lazy loading, but it's seeing them, so they're loading in anyway. It defeats the purpose of your lazy loading. So what we would do here is we want to use this is intersecting and make an if statement to deal with that. So we could actually leave this exactly as it is, but before that we could do an if entry is intersecting. Right away we can say return. So what this is saying is the exclamation point here is saying if this is false. So is our entry intersecting? If it's true, we ignore this. So if it's true, we ignore that and we actually run this. But if it is false, so it's saying if this is false, we return. And if ever a function hits return, it's out. We're done. The function stops. So we're checking. It's not intersecting. Okay, we're done. We're not going to look at all this other stuff that's going on over here. It is intersecting. Okay, now this isn't true, so now I'm going to run this other stuff that's down here. Now you could do this as like a positive statement and throw this inside of here. But we could do it this way too. So let's hit refresh on here and let's see. So you can see it worked, but look at that. We only have the first one showing up in there. And actually to do this, let's change this over to target so we can really see, it cleans that up a little bit. So section 1 is intersecting on my page. Now there's 2 interesting things that are going to happen. So first you can see it's only section 1 that we have on there because this is the only thing that this is actually working for. It's the only one that's actually intersecting right now. So it's going to, we hit section 2, so that one just switched over. But what's also interesting here is section 1 won't declip. It won't come off because this isn't firing when our item is leaving the page. It's only firing when something is actually intersecting. So now we're going to get to section 3. There it is. So we can see section 3 is coming up on the page. It hits the page. Oh, there we go. It has come in, and then we can do section 4 and do section 5. And then when I come back up, the opposite is going to happen. So when I get to section 3 here, oh, you can see that it just intersected, and it had the inverse class on, which got taken off along the way there. So now when I come up this way, we're going to get to section 2, and when that enters the page, boom, and we're done, and it is working fabulously. Now there's one more thing that we can do here where we can unobserve something. Once the observation has happened, it's in our screen, we might not want to watch it anymore. So it really depends on what you're using your intersection observer for. If you're doing lazy loading images, which we're going to look at in another video, you definitely want to set it up a little bit like this. Whereas with other stuff, you wouldn't want to. And we're gonna see examples of both in the coming weeks. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to say that I want my observer, and I want to unobserve. So we can tell it, okay, once something has happened, stop watching, but we have to tell it what we want it to unobserve. So what do I want to unobserve? My entry target. So this target that we were just watching, okay, we're done, finished. Let's stop watching that. So let's take a look. So you can see my section 1 is there. You can see section 2 is coming in at the bottom of my screen. Boop, it's been observed. Let's get to section 3. But now, if I scroll back up, nothing happens. That change is done, and this observer is dead. It's gone. It's not watching these anymore. It's still looking at 4 and 5. So if I start going down again now, when I get to section 4, boop, it's still working, but it's done. As soon as that observation has happened, it's no longer observing it because of how I set this up. So as I said, that could be really, really useful once we get into lazy loading of images, and there might be a few other things along the way as well. And that is how intersection observers work. Of course, in that one, it wasn't the prettiest thing, but we understand the theory now. So now that you know what you're doing, we're going to be learning in the next few weeks on how to do some really, really cool and fun stuff with it. So thank you so much for watching this video. An extra special shout out to my patrons. Thank you guys for supporting everything I do here at my channel. I really, really appreciate it. And a massive shout out to Lauren, Jonathan, and Fernando for being my supporters of awesome. You guys are fantastic. Thank you very much for your generous. I look forward to seeing you next week when we're going to kick this off and start doing some really fun stuff with it. But until then, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.